So one of the things that was mentioned towards the end of the last lecture about nominal and real value was price indices, or price index, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we can, first thing is we're going to look at the basic formula. So a price index is defined as the price of the market basket in the specific year of a good over the price of the market basket in the base year times 100. So to give a real world example, we'll use the same market basket that we used in our last lesson, which is going to be candy bars. And we have 250 as the price of the market basket in the specific year, which happened to be 2014 in the example. And then the price of the market basket in the base year, which was 1900, is 1. And so when you multiply by 100, the price index ends up being 2,500. Now, when you're actually using the price index is when you're looking to change nominal GDP or a nominal value into a real value, like again we saw in the last lesson. Now, the most effective way to do this is to take your nominal GDP and divide by that price index when that price index has already been divided by 100. In other words, it's put into a decimal in the hundredths place. The result of this is your adjusted / relative / real GDP, whatever term works best for you. So when we talk about price indices and we're talking about nominal or real value, it's all related to a change in the market basket price. But a question that's natural to ask is, well, why is the market basket price changing? And the forces behind that are inflation. So there are two main types of inflation: demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. So let's start by talking about demand pull inflation. So again, using that candy bar example, when we're talking about demand pull inflation, it's a market that's producing or outputting at its maximum capacity. So 3 candy bars is all that our market can possibly put out. We are maximizing all of our resources, everything we have at our disposal, and the most we can produce is 3 candy bars. However, the demand for those candy bars has increased. And as a result, the price of goods, the price of that candy bar, also increases. Now, in contrast, cost push inflation is when the cost of those products, so for example, the cocoa bean, one of the products that goes into a chocolate bar, when that cost increases, the price of the goods also increase. Now, inflation is special in the sense, or specifically, cost push inflation is special in the sense that it's self-limiting. The result of cost push inflation is that because there's more, the product now costs more, and there's not a coinciding increase in demand as there was in demand pull inflation, the amount of supply will go down, the amount of demand will go down, and overall the amount of output in the economy will go down, and that's what we know as a recession. Now, the most common cause of a cost push is something called a supply shock. So if anything in the supply chain of producing those candy bars is shocked, like for example, the amount of cocoa beans produced in a year is dramatically decreased by famine, then we're going to have cost push inflations as the cost to produce and therefore the cost to buy a chocolate bar increases. So what are the effects of inflation? There are a couple different groups we're going to be looking at when it comes to inflation and how it impacts them. The first is going to be fixed income receivers. So when you're talking about fixed income receivers, they are people who are on, say, a classic example is an elderly couple on a private pension, or let's say a landlord who is receiving payment from his tenants that's at a regular rate. It's $100 every month, let's say. The problem is that if there's inflation, the amount that money is actually worth in terms of how much you can buy things decreases. And so even though someone who's a fixed income recipient is still getting the same amount of money, they're unable to buy the same amount of goods. This situation is also similarly mirrored in savers. So savers, that money that they have in the bank, or a bank's a bad example, but all that money that they have underneath their mattress, let's say, decreases in value as inflation occurs. That money's not actually doing anything or growing in any way. And as inflation occurs, the value, how much you can actually buy, decreases. And so even though the money's not being touched, how much you can buy is becoming less and less and less. A third group that's affected by inflation is creditors. So creditors loan out a certain amount of money and expect that same amount of money back. So when we don't take into account interest for a moment, when inflation occurs, they actually lose money. Because while they're still getting the same number of dollars back, the actual value of those dollars is less. And so you'll see how the dollar sign that's coming back is less. They're not actually getting the same value back that they loaned out. A fourth group that we're going to look at is flexible income receivers. Now, flexible income receivers are different than fixed income receivers in that whatever their income stream may be, it accounts for the possibility of inflation. One of the examples is Social Security, which is supposed to be unaffected by inflation because of index CPIs, which means that they get more money based off of whatever the economy looks like. So if inflation occurs, they get whatever they're supposed to, what is supposed to be a fixed income, plus an amount that accounts for inflation. And so they tend to be less affected by the harms of inflation. Now, the last group we're going to look at is debtors. So debtors have probably the best situation in an inflating market, because they borrowed a certain amount of money in terms of dollars. And while they still pay back that same dollars, it's worth less, and so it's easier to pay back. They're actually giving the bank or whatever creditor loaned them that money less money than they, in terms of value, than they were given. And so it's probably the best deal for them. And so those are the 5 main groups that are affected by inflation. 3 of them are hurt in terms of that they're not actually getting the same value back. One of them stays relatively the same because they have something that's added to their fixed income that allows them to handle inflation. And the last is the debtor, who tends to be better off because the amount that they're paying back is actually less than what they were loaned.